it's in a place like Bowling Green, Kentucky, where they went out and asked people, what should the future of our community be? And when 8,000 people respond, they use AI to actually synthesize, summarize, group, bucket, coordinate, what people are saying and translate that into real outcomes.
Thanks for joining for this episode of the TechSpective Podcast. I have with me Beth Noveck, author of Reboot, AI and the Race to Save Democracy. So Beth, welcome. And if you would like to give a little bit of background on yourself for everyone, that would be great.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. So I wear a few hats. Professor at Northeastern is my day job, where I lead the Burns Center for Social Change, and we work with students on building AI for social good. But I also founded a program called Innovate US, where we are probably the largest, or at least the fastest growing AI training program for people in public sector, working across the whole of the United States and now in 80 countries. And when I'm not doing that, I'm writing books about AI and democracy that are rooted in a lot of work that I've had in the public sector, leading AI for the state of New Jersey, and before that, tech for the federal government under Obama. So try to keep my feet, one in each of the public sector, the academic world, and occasionally even some volunteering. And my primary role is as a parent. All
right. Well, sounds like you have a full day. That's a lot to fit into a day. The book, Reboot, AI and the Race to Save Democracy, like very interesting to me, the premise, because I'm a tech guy and I'm fascinated by AI, also a little bit scared of it, but then I'm also very active politically, and so looking at that cross section, I think is a very interesting conversation that I'm looking forward to have. Have you seen? Let me start with this. Have you seen the documentary that was out recently, the AI doc, or How I Became an Apocalyptimist?
I have not seen it. Should I see it?
You should see it. He's got in this documentary, he interviews Sam Altman, he interviews Dario. I don't want to spoil it, but I was going to say that the movie or the documentary basically sets up in like 3 stages, and like the first group of people he talks to are the doomsayers. So like it starts off with, we're all going to die. There's no point. We already lost, and Skynet happened 5 years ago, and it's game over. Then the second third are all of the AI is the most magical, wonderful thing that's ever happened in the course of humanity. It's going to solve world hunger. It's going to cure cancer. It's going to do all these things magically, and we're all going to sit around sipping pina coladas. And then it ends with a third section that kind of like says, okay, well, let's find the happy medium here of like, okay, it's probably not as bad as those first groups said. It's also not as good as that second group said. Practically speaking, what can we do with this? And so I think it was good. It was a good documentary for that purpose. But that's kind of where I look at this premise too, because I look at, from the time this current presidential administration started, and you bring in Elon Musk to run Doge, and you bring in Palantir and stuff, and so like what I see as far as AI in government at the federal level is just bad. Like there's nothing good about what they're doing in my mind. But then I see the things that you describe as the potential things, and that's where it gets kind of tied to the documentary. Like they do talk about like, yeah, but there are great things you can accomplish with AI if you use it the right way to like connect the dots and find ways to do things better and such. So like, I guess let's just start with where do you sit on the spectrum of doomsaying Skynet to cured world hunger?
So I sit in that, I'm in the last 5 minutes of that movie. I sit in that messy middle space between the two. And that's very much the motivation behind why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because the conversation tends to be at one of these two polar opposites. And yes, there is a conversation that not just that it will cure world hunger and we can all drink pina coladas, but that AI is a huge driver of geopolitical dominance and of economic growth. And we have to focus only on deregulating or failing to regulate the sector because we want to unleash all the jobs that it will create. Or you have that other conversation about, interestingly, often perpetuated by the very same people who build these tools, who make these tools, and who are the inventor of these tools, curiously are also the people who will tell you they are the most dangerous. It is perhaps not surprising that the people who created these tools want to tell you how powerful and magical they are. I think what's much more interesting is that messy middle, is that place where we're talking about not the two extremes, but what can we do with these tools and how can we kind of reduce the temperature and say, look, this is the next generation of word processor. This is a next generation of calculator. It is a tool. It's a set of tools, frankly, for processing data. That data may be words, that data may be numbers. And really, we need to be talking about how and why we're going to use these tools, what tools we want, what we want them to do, and again, what's the education that we all need to use them responsibly.
Right.
We're not having, in my view, enough of that conversation. It's not surprising. If it bleeds, it leads. And when you have really dramatic headlines about the robot apocalypse, boy, who doesn't want to report on that? Or if you have headlines about how little people trust AI, again, with good reason, that despair makes for good headlines. It is a much less, shall we say, exciting piece of news to talk about, gee, the community activist and organizer who starts using these tools to go out into their neighborhood and wants to make a flyer to help clean up the park, or wants to get their neighbors together around a table and record those conversations to extract what are the things that people care about and hear about. You talk and write a lot about security issues. The doom and gloom, the intrusion is the interesting story, but the ways in which I may be able to use AI to actually help me do better threat preparedness, better scenario planning, to fight against the intrusion may be less interesting from a headline grabbing perspective, but I think it's the much more important story. And we need to be asking, how do we realize those benefits and not just end up in this defensive posture all the time?
Okay. Well, so that's actually a pretty good segue because, over the last couple of years, it's like starting from when ChatGPT came out and everything was generative AI, and we switched to over time to agentic AI, and in those conversations. But in the conversations that I have with tech companies, with security vendors, there was initially there was a lot of, oh, this is horrible because now the bad guys have access to this, and so all the phishing attacks are going to be better because they don't need to be in broken English anymore. You can just ask ChatGPT to write you a perfect phishing email. Fast forward to last week or the week before, whenever it was, and you've got Fable 5 from Anthropic and Mythos or whatever, so there was a lot of this is horrible because the bad guys are going to have access to this, and it's going to dramatically accelerate the attack surface, the threat vectors. And then it was like, yes, but we also have those tools, so we can also use AI to dramatically improve our defenses. Anything they can do, we can hopefully do better.
We can do better.
And so it is a little bit of both. And when it comes to, I think from where you're talking about and framing things, on the one side, I'm like, okay, well, there's all kinds of ways I can use AI maliciously, in a political context, to create deep fake videos, to create disinformation. There's lots of things I can use AI for to disrupt politics and government. But there's also a lot of promising things you could accomplish with it, and ways that you could use it to, rebuild public trust and find better ways to do policy. So it's like, but I guess my question to you and to the kind of the world at large is just, how do we make sure we stay on that side of the fence? How do we, again, we can, anything you can do, we can hopefully do better. But it's like, how do we make sure we do it better?
So I think, it starts with the conversation that we're having and talking about what these alternatives are, having a mental model or a vision for what those alternatives are. But it doesn't stop with that. I think it's not enough just to say, yes, we could do positive things or we could do negative things. In the same way that we can talk about using nuclear to build a bomb or to build a power plant, it's then what comes after that. We need to not just talk about prevention of nuclear war. We have to say, what are the investments we need to make to build the power plant? So this is, I have a lot of the same, sort of prescriptions here in thinking about, okay, if we want to realize that more positive future, yes, it's not just about giving examples of people going out and doing empowering things and positive things as opposed to corrosive things with the tools. It's about saying, number one, what are the tools that we're buying? What are the tools that we are building? So are those tools publicly owned, managed, or governed, or are they tools that are purely privatized, over which we have no control, no insight, no access? So when we're using our purchasing power, especially in large companies or in governments that control significant market power, government's the largest purchaser of tech in this country, we have the power to push back, and we should be pushing back. We need to be saying, we want to ensure that our data is secure, that our data is private, that we know what the training data is that went into these things. We want to make sure that these tools are well tested and continue to be tested. So it starts with what are the tools that we're using, both from an underlying sort of large language model, the kind of generative AI or the machine learning models that we're using, but also the things that we build higher up the stack. That we want to ensure, especially for tools, algorithmic tools, predictive tools, if we're going to use them in highly sensitive areas, like saying, whether you should go back or at risk of going back to prison or not, or committing a crime and are likely to reoffend, or whether we are going to use a tool to determine whether we think it's likely you committed fraud on this benefit form. So anything especially highly sensitive like that, and this is why the Europeans have defined this as a high risk category and have defined this concept of high risk uses of tech, we want to be sure we know what the tools are that we're using, number one. Number two, we have to talk about universal training and learning, whether that's for public sector, private sector, schools. We made this mistake with the internet first and then later with social media. We put our head in the sand and we said, oh, we're too scared of these things. And we didn't teach people how to use them. I'm not talking about teaching people about a product, like a vendor training, should I use this product or that? It's about what are safe and good practices, in the same way that we now have universal training around cybersecurity. Right. And by the way, it's not enough. We tell people, don't write your password on a Post-it note. So in some companies you have that requirement, but that is not unfortunately a universal. And that's why we have so many people who are victims of cybercrime and victims of phishing and other both hacking and financial fraud scams. We need much more widespread education around AI in a vendor neutral way. Again, not selling a product, but helping people to understand, how might I use this in my day-to-day life? What are these tools good for? What are they not good for? And what are the hard questions that I need to be asking? So that's another place that I think, and I'll stop with that for the moment, that I think from an investment perspective, we need to be really thinking about, what are the proactive things that we do. And then lastly, I'll just say that when it comes to what we're doing in schools and universities, we need to get beyond just being in that defensive posture of criticizing technology to actually proactively say, what are the things that we think we should go out and build? So if we want to realize that more positive future, we need to be training the next generation of leader, the next generation, whether they're in tech or another field, to say, how can you use AI to do good in the world? So there's some key investments we really need to make.
Well, I guess I'll take two things. Now, number one is I was going to say, I agree on the training perspective like, Google has become it's just a verb now. Have you Googled that? Is the verb for, did you look that up on the internet?
Right.
But what I've learned over time,
thankfully, it's not to Bing that.
Yes. Well, but what I've learned over time is like that isn't the results of that are not universal. It's like, well, how did you Google it? Like, you have to know how to query it the right way. And the same thing is true of AI. And so, like, some people have bad experiences with AI, but it's like, well, maybe it's a function of, training. Maybe it's a function of you don't really know how to use it properly, and therefore you didn't get the results you wanted. The second thing I was going to say is it seems to me like there's always like a negative connotation of something that kind of like ends up owning the headline. So like blockchain, lots of good uses of blockchain. Blockchain is a lot of, there's lots of great things you can do with blockchain. But it immediately became like married to the concept of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And so like in a lot of people's minds, that those two things are inseparable, and therefore blockchain is bad because cryptocurrency seems like a Ponzi scheme. In a similar vein here, there are great things you can do. Like on paper, I can totally get behind the concept of like flock cameras. I can totally get behind like the one of the things that comes to mind is the Super Bowl commercial that Amazon did for the Ring cameras, and it's like what they advertised in the commercial, like, yes, that sounds pretty cool. If my dog is lost and you can just kind of put out an APB on the Ring cameras and you can help me find my dog, that sounds amazing. And it's like
crowdsourcing.
The problem is all of those things can also be used for evil, and they are. And so it gives people a bad experience, because people think, oh, well, flock cameras are automatically bad because they're just being used to, track and find, immigrants or whatever. Same thing with the Ring cameras. Like all of these technologies are being used for evil, and therefore people have a bad taste in their mouth about it.
And again, it's why we have to talk about how we balance the risks. Especially if you are interested in security, that there is no such thing as 100% secure environment. It's always about balancing the risks. It's always about deciding what is an acceptable level of risk. So do I want to have the conversation around what can I do with my Ring doorbell? What are the worst possible scenarios? What are the best possible scenarios? If people understand what the tech is and what it's for, then we can have a reasonable conversation around, hey, maybe there's some things we want to regulate. Maybe we want to say, look, if you use it in this bad way to go spy on people, we're going to criminalize that. And we do often do that. We have if I use Microsoft Word tomorrow to write you an extortion note, to write a ransom note and then kidnap your dog, that is a criminal act. I can use the same tool to then go out and write a poem or a love note, etc. So it's not that it's a choice between do nothing or do something, or no regulation or regulation. We have choices about what we do. That starts with some education. And one of the things with AI and with tech is we have for a long time, it has been acceptable to say, I'm not a technologist, and throw up your hands. I don't know anything about tech because I don't have a computer science degree. Well, guess what? I don't have a computer science degree myself. The great thing about generative AI in particular is these are tools that are controlled by language. So you do not, in fact, need to have a computer science degree. You do not, in fact, need to know math to be able to understand. Even to use these tools at a high level, you can just use your voice. You don't even need to know English. You can know other languages to use them. So we're really at a point where I think, and arguably 10 years ago, this would have been different with the web or with other, computer programming languages. Now we really have no excuse to say that everybody could gain mastery. Yes, I might not understand, the kind of intricate math of how machine learning models work, or how generative AI as a form of machine learning sort of calculates what the next word in the sentence is going to be.
Right.
But I can, I don't need to be an auto mechanic to be a safe driver. And it's the same thing here. We need to learn how to drive, and we need to learn and have a discussion about what are the rules of the road that we want to occupy.
Agreed. And I guess one of the things that I sometimes struggle with, though, is there's like the sort of the ideal, or like we can talk about it like kind of like in the abstract and say, yes, here are good things we can do, bad things we can do, whatever. Sometimes though I step back and I say, yes, but we only have these AI platforms really to choose from. And so then it comes back to the same problems that we have with like media, mainstream media right now, which is like it's all been bought up by tech oligarchs, and it's like, so whether I choose to use Claude or OpenAI or Copilot or XAI, like all these platforms, they can do amazing things. Actually, here's a good kind of tie back. A while back, I had Chris Inglis on the podcast, as former head of the National Security Agency during the Snowden era, and it happened to be right when I was reading Snowden's book, and so I had him on and we talked about it, and he was very reasonable and diplomatic about how he framed things and like why he thought Snowden was wrong. He didn't just come on and be like, that man's a traitor, but he basically was like, well, Snowden made some leaps in logic. He made he jumped to some conclusions, like the things he found and knew about. Yes, those are true, but he made some assumptions about like how they would be used or could be used, and though that part wasn't true. And I said to Chris, I said, okay, well, let's say that I just believe you, and that's true. The NSA had no intention of using that data in that way. And from your perspective, you're saying, so that means it was okay. And I'm telling you that as a US citizen, I kind of still feel like that's not okay. And the reason it's not okay is because it's not that you didn't do anything with the data still exists. And then you fast forward 12 years and now Palantir's in there and Palantir has the data. And so like it's, and so like even with like Ring cameras, like maybe Ring cameras were great. In fact, I've had Ring cameras, like they're like the technology is fine, but like what you invest in and deploy and kind of build around today might not have the same code of ethics next year.
Yeah. I know, and that is one of the reasons why you see other countries, for example, moving towards what they refer to as AI sovereignty. They are very worried about investing in an American tech stack, using American products, out of the fear that because of the highly deregulated nature of our markets, that even a company, as you say, that may be, abiding by fairly standard big company practices, they're fairly safe, that tomorrow they're going to sell your data to somebody else. Or they're going to be subject to some political pressure where the administration says, we want you to do X, Y, and Z. We've seen the pressures that companies have been under from an administration that says, I want you to go out and fire this comedian. I want you to go out and fire this newscaster. And because the companies have, need their merger to be approved or want to be on the right side of the powers that be, are willing to, change their practices. So that's why you see people, asking that question of what is okay to do, and why it's so important for those who have the power to push back, who have the power of the purse in terms of what they're buying, to say, I want to be careful about where I put my money, and I want to use my purchasing power to maybe demand some safety and security, to say, look, I want my data not just to live in this cloud over here, but I want it to be backed up in this cloud where I will have control of it. I want to be able to access my own data. So we've seen some of those debates, and I hear you on how now, for most of us, we're talking about a choice between Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT, or Microsoft Copilot. you and I are not going out and building our own large language model. And yes, there are some smaller open source alternatives, but maybe we don't want to download a DeepSeek from China where we have other worries about security risks from those tools. But the reality is, for what most people are doing, the fact that it sits on top of ChatGPT or Claude, it's what I do on top of that, right? I can use, again, I'm using a commercial word processor, Google Docs or Microsoft Word, but the novel that I write on top of it belongs to me. And so there are very important policy debates about what fundamentally is that tech infrastructure, and do we need a public alternative? Do we need a public complement? And what that looks like in the same way. Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, I've actually, I think back from like when the height of the net neutrality debates back in like 2014 or whatever, like I've argued that the search engine, like, Google, like that should be like a Library of Congress entity. Like there should be a non-commercial public sector search engine. Like it shouldn't be something that has a profit motive. And it's like fast forward to now where like Google has basically changed their whole model where you go search something now and you don't get a list of results links to click on. You just get their AI summary. And so again, you're kind of like you're giving a lot of faith to Google to come up with the right answer, and you're just assuming that the answer it gives you is right, and you don't really have any way of checking.
And you are right that we have put up for a long time with this thing that has become so core to how we think, to how we organize information, to how we learn, to everything about social life. Like Google works sort of well enough that we have tolerated it and haven't said, and it works. It's very good. And so we say, the fact that it has ads on the side, we're okay with that. Had the tool been designed differently, or if tomorrow the tool were to be designed differently, and we saw this with Twitter, right? Twitter, yes, it was a commercial product before, but it worked in a certain way that sort of worked tolerably well for most people, and we all put up with it and said, yes, this will be the town square. But then Elon Musk came along, and not only did he have very, very extreme politics, but they changed very core features about how the platform works. And suddenly a lot of people said, it's no longer good enough. And we have lamented the loss of what was a version of our public square and our public sphere. So we worry, I think, about the same thing. We want, and I would argue, these tools are powerful and we want to have them be part of our lives. They are objectively a godsend when it comes to sorting and organizing information, to helping us manage language. These are, again, it's a powerful word processor. But we also know from our experience with social media and with the internet that it is very likely to become a core way that we think, that we learn, that our children kind of become socialized, and therefore we have to do things differently. But at the same time as we're having these bigger conversations around what is the underlying infrastructure and how do we regulate it, we can still build a lot of great things on top of it. And that's part of what I wrote the book to focus on, is focusing on a lot of the people who are doing very cool stuff, even with these commercial tools. And when we start to work on building these better things and better things on top of them, that are open source. So let me give you a quick example here. The city of Boston went out and said, you know what? We have these tools that can now make it easier for me to summarize and translate what happens in a city council meeting. I may live in Boston, but how do I really, unless I'm a real government watcher, I'm going to sit on, the equivalent of C-SPAN and start reading transcripts of what happens in my local town council, I'm not going to know what's going on. So they said, look, we can use AI to summarize those transcripts, give people more transparency into their government. They built it on top of Gemini. It is sitting on top of a commercial tool and the commercial LLM, but the thing that sits on top of it is free and open. And look, as between using that, and I also know a company that sells access to city council meetings, I would far rather have the free open one built by the city that doesn't have an agenda or an axe to grind than paying this company that built a paid tool. Again, they're also using Gemini or ChatGPT or whatnot, but the thing on top of it they are summarizing, and they have, by the way, a very, very specific political viewpoint, which they put in their materials, what their politics are. Unless I share their political viewpoint, I don't want to read their summary of what the city council says with their annotations and their commentary and their politics. I would rather have the one that is just the sort of quote unquote objective summary. So I think we have choices to make about where a commercial tool is appropriate and where it is not good enough for us. And I would say there are some areas where, like those city council minutes, I want something that's non-commercial. And by the way, the great thing is I can build that now. Yes, is it sitting on a bit of a shaky foundation because it's sitting on top of Gemini? And could Gemini change the rules out from under me? Yes, but it's a bet I'm willing to make right now because I would rather have a free, transparent, open tool that tells me what's happening in my city council in a way that I can understand without having to go to the meeting.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I've used there are tools that I've used for years, like even before ChatGPT was a thing, that have since enhanced more with AI. Like I use Otter to capture the transcripts of meetings I'm on. I use Grammarly, and it's like those things are kind of invaluable for what I do, because like I used to before I had Otter, I would be sitting here manually scribbling notes as fast as I can while we're talking. And it's like, that is distracting. It means I missed half the conversation because I was too busy trying to write down what you already said before. And Otter allows me to like actually be engaged in the conversation and just refer back to the notes. And you could just, and Otter will just give you a summary, like, hey, here's basically what was said. Here are the action items that you're supposed to be taking care of from this meeting. It's like, that's amazing.
One of the stories that I tell in the book, I think it's in the book, is being at a restaurant and overhearing two people talking at a table about the person taking notes at the meeting and why it's always their boss always assigns a female employee to take notes, and why it wouldn't be great to have occasionally assign a male employee to take notes instead of just sort of, they were complaining that the assumption is that the woman is sort of quote unquote the secretary to take notes at the meeting.
Right.
And I thought to myself, gee, how great it would be if neither the junior female or male person were taking notes, because an AI tool can do that, allowing those two junior people potentially to participate in the meeting or to do something more substantive. How exciting is that? And again, we're getting rid of what is a really thankless task that again often signifies being the bottom on the totem pole, because you have to do that. Or for all of us who have to take notes in meetings, we get out of calls and go, what was it I was supposed to do? And what was that follow-up? It's just such a godsend in terms of efficiency and productivity, and again, allowing us to spend time on more meaningful things. Is that a place where we need to have a free, open source, democratic version of the tool? Probably not. I mean, if Otter starts to manipulate the notes, to falsify the notes, to start giving me advertising with my notes, then maybe I'm going to turn it off, and either I'm going to buy something else or I'm going to say we need a better, more accountable alternative. But for what it does, it's perfectly fine.
So that's the part, though, that I think needs, like, someone is going to have to remain vigilant about these things, because the general population is just going to be using the tools, whether it's Otter or Grammarly or ChatGPT or whatever, and probably aren't going to notice, like, because those kind of changes can be subtle. Like, I mean, some of them are not. Some of them are less subtle. Like, Grok is just kind of like full on right wing, but it could be subtle. You might not realize that the information being given to you is being manipulated, is maybe even a strong word. But even when you Google stuff, like I had this conversation a few years back on the podcast about, because the Google algorithm gets personalized over time, is like based on your interest, is based on like what things you've searched in the past. And so like, even if you and I search the exact same query, we're not necessarily going to get the exact same results. Like the results are influenced by the algorithm. And that algorithm could then be further influenced by the politics of the company that controls the algorithm. And so those things are subtle. They can be. And
we've talked for a long time about, worries that in China, if I search for Taiwan or I search for Tiananmen Square, I don't get the I don't get free and open search results, so search results are manipulated. I think we've come to understand some of those issues where we used to lay the blame sort of further afield. We're now realizing these decisions are, hitting closer to home for us. We know, for example, that when we go to book an airline ticket, you may see a different price than I see. I may see a different price right now than I'm going to see an hour from now, depending on the day of the week and the weather and what time it is and whether it's after lunch or not, and whether I just searched, something expensive or something cheap. It's going to give me a different price. That is why there are places like New York State that are saying, hey, maybe we want to regulate that kind of algorithmic pricing. We don't want there to be two different prices. It's why, Europe has very strict laws around pricing transparency. And because we've made some of those decisions about where we think that kind of, I'll use the word manipulation in quotes. Again, sometimes manipulation is a good thing in the sense of it knows that I'm really interested in science fiction and therefore I'm going to get ads about science fiction. Netflix knows I like this. It's going to suggest more movies about this instead of that. When it's positive, we call it targeting. When we don't like it, we call it manipulation. So that drives a lot of what our decisions are about what we want to buy as individuals. And to your point, understanding what those choices are and that we have choices, understanding that targeting is happening or that manipulation is happening and that it is only getting worse in an age of AI and the data that it has access to. We desperately are playing a race to catch up in terms of our own understanding so we can make better decisions. And again, sometimes it's not about individual decision making. I might not have choices, and that's where regulation has to come in and saying, like, it is not good enough to have, if none of our market choices allow me to protect my privacy, if none of our market options actually allow me freedom of choice or are transparent, that's where the law needs to come in and say, you know what, it's time for us to have alternatives.
Fair. Well, and yeah, because there are a lot of things where it's like you'll still see people kind of throw around like, well, we live in, it's a free country. We live in a capitalist society. Like, if you don't like what that vendor is doing, it's a free market. You don't have to give them your money. And it's like, yeah, that's true in an ideal sense. It's true theoretically, but like sometimes it's not that true. Like if your only options are between these three, large, tech oligarchs or whatever, and they all have kind of the same politics. It's like, well, yes, I could choose the lesser of three evils, but like that's not real, or that's not a real choice. It's a, whatever. I want to talk about governance though. Like, so I've seen like, the Sam Altmans, the Mark Zuckerbergs or whatever talk about how like, well, we need to not have any governance. There can't be any governance on AI because China's going to do what China's going to do. And there's some sort of existential threat we need to be concerned about. And therefore, if they don't have regulations, we can't have regulations because then we can't beat them. The whole thing seems like a sort of chicken little sky is falling. I'm going to use this fear mongering to justify what I want to do. Because there's lots of things that we can say, like we don't decide our regulations based on or we shouldn't decide our regulations based on what other countries are doing.
Because they smoke in China is not a reason we shouldn't ban smoking in restaurants here, right?
Right, and so like I get it on one level, but on another, it's like, well, no, you can't just like toss out rules because it's inconvenient for what you're trying to accomplish. But one of the things, so there's a lot of talk about AI governance and what should we govern and not govern and how do we govern. Like I wrote about the RAISE Act, RAISE Act in New York. But in the book, I think you kind of like frame an argument around maybe not so much governance as much as the like how we design and implement these things. And it's like, what is the difference? Like, what's your perspective on how we govern? How do we govern effectively? Like, because like I said, there are definitely reasons to want to govern, and there are reasons to want to take the shackles off. So how do you find the balance?
Well, I think you are the short answer is yes to what you're saying. I think you correctly point out the fact that there is a balance, and the sort of fear mongering that somehow any regulation is going to shackle American industry, cost American jobs, mean the death of our economy, this, that, and the other, and other fear mongering prognostication that we get. There is obviously concern that the people doing the regulating understand so little about the technology, and will do a very bad job of regulating it, or that any attempt to essentially impose the sort of rather slow and blunt instrument of law on something that is as fast moving as
Right.
AI is challenging. I don't want to discount the concerns about regulating badly. Less because I'm worried about Sam Altman not making enough, or his future shareholders not making enough money, and more because I do want us to innovate in the use of these technologies. I do want us to improve where they're going. But I think it has to do with the direction of our regulation. Part of my concern here is that, again, we tend to take this very defensive posture about regulation in ways that are designed solely to prevent risk. Instead of asking the question, what are the investments that we want to make to ensure that we are developing, investing in, creating the best possible AI to do the things we want to do? So the federal government, for example, when COVID struck, or when we've had other disease outbreaks, has said, we are going to use our market power to ensure that we are subsidizing the development of a vaccine by doing things like committing to buying the vaccines that we create. It's called an advance market commitment. We should be doing similar kinds of things here, where we're asking, what is it that we want? What is the equivalent of the vaccine? We should want to have tools that help give kids a personalized reading tutor. We should want to have tools that help us to deliver every government benefit or service in every language in simple and plain English. We should want to invest in the kind of chatbot that will give you reliable information consistently over time. So setting challenges, defining, if you will, markets that we want to create, products that we want to buy around things that matter. You do have a lot of pharmaceutical you have a lot of R&D and money invested in the drug space around very widespread diseases. But we've seen the same problem with what are sometimes called orphan diseases, where you will have lots of money going to R&D around erectile dysfunction or cancer or diabetes, drugs diseases that affect a lot of people, but something that affects only the poor or affects only a few people doesn't get the investment that it needs. And it's where you have those situations of market failure, or simply where we have a public good that we want to invest in, where we say, you know what, we think it's really, really important, and this is something past administrations have done, said, you know what, brain cancer is really terrible, we're not doing enough, we ought to put a whole heck of a lot more money into trying to solve the problem of brain cancer. So we identify those things that we want government to invest in, and we've always done that, whether it's COVID vaccines or brain cancer research or, sending somebody to the moon. We invest in the things that matter to us. And this is a space where we are not having the conversation around what matters to us with AI. If we're going to spend the power, the water, the energy, if we're going to spend the money, what do we want AI to do? And that's what I'm asking us to focus on.
Okay. Well, okay. So I want to wind down, but the on the issue of, since there's been an internet, since there's been technology, it has been an issue that Congress in general, like government is generally slow moving. The median age of the people, elected officials is old, and they don't understand the technology. Plus, even if they do understand it, it just takes a while to pass stuff. It's a slow moving process, and so that is a problem for regulation. But I think right now the other problem is it seems that right now Congress has sort of realized that, like the government has realized, oh, hey, we don't really know this stuff. Let's get people who do know this stuff. But then it's like, well, it depends on, well, who are you picking? What voice are you listening to inform you about what's good, bad, or indifferent? And so that I think needs to be a more publicly discussed democratic process where they're not just asking, Peter Thiel what he thinks. They're actually getting a consensus of experts, as you should. For the people,
and in the news recently, you of course heard that Peter Thiel is sponsoring his own little private dinner club,
right?
Where politicians, and this is an age-old problem, are sitting down with a handful of very wealthy business people, and one or two celebrity academics.
It reminds me of like the smoking man from X-Files or whatever. It's like, what's this secret cabal thing that's going on? That's like kind of pulling those puppet strings behind the scenes.
So that's where, and then that's where policies get formulated and ideas get formulated for sort of how we're going to regulate. It's because Peter Thiel is whispering in somebody's ear. And so we definitely need, less whispering and more ears.
Final question. For people who are listening, who are genuinely worried, not just about AI broadly, but kind of specifically about whether democracy survives this moment, what is your sort of like the grounded case for optimism? What actually gives you hope when you look at the real world and the work you're doing day to day about why we can ultimately kind of harness this for good?
So let me focus on one thing here, which is that democracy means many things to many people, right? It's about voting. It's about the rule of law. It's about a certain set of values. So I'll simplify here in the interest of time. Democracy, as I think about it and understand it, is a system of rule by the governed, right? Where we have a voice in the decisions that affect our lives. We have not had a voice for a very, very long time. People who have money have a seat at the table. And I think you and I feel that not just at a federal level, but even at a local level, we have vanishingly little influence other than at the ballot box once a year at best about the decisions that affect our lives. You can kind of understand how we got there because we used to live in a world of information scarcity where it was really difficult to make your voice heard. If you remember, there was a day and age in which we had broadcast TV and a couple of channels. When I was born, we had a few channels and a very small number of people who controlled them. There was no notion of my being able to speak and be heard. Fast forward, we have the internet. Yay, we have TikTok. You're showing off your dance moves on YouTube. Everybody has a podcast suddenly. Hooray. But with everybody talking, it becomes increasingly hard for institutions to listen. So we really, even if we wanted to, we haven't done a better job of really realizing the hope for democracy. In ancient Athens, it was a pretty small place. So you could have a world in which everybody, as they did, in which everybody took turns being part of the governing classes. They rotated through different roles. You could be a general, and then you could be a juror, and then you could be a lawmaker. You sort of rotated, and we had a rather small world. And as Aristotle said, democracy was a distance man could traverse in a day. Now, my hope is, and what I'm excited about, is that in a city like Bogota in Colombia, has a lot of other problems, but they went out and asked the public, how should we be spending a portion of our city budget? And they did it on WhatsApp and used AI to summarize and synthesize what people were saying. And they heard from 50,000 people were able to take their voices into account. In Brazil, a Senate that's larger than ours, you or I, if we're Brazilian, again, they have other challenges, but you could propose a piece of legislation. Because they're using AI to help them, they can then not just summarize what people are saying, but then convert that sort of chicken scratch proposal that you or I might make into something that can actually be used as a piece of legislation, because we may not know, how do I write a law? I just have an idea for something that I want. It's in a place like Bowling Green, Kentucky, where they went out and asked people, what should the future of our community be? And when 8,000 people respond, they use AI to actually synthesize, summarize, group, bucket, coordinate, what people are saying and translate that into real outcomes. So I am hopeful, or optimistic, shall we say, hopeful may be the wrong word, that with the right intentions, we could actually realize the hope that we had for the internet 30 years ago, but that we didn't realize how badly it would go for a whole lot of reasons, but we didn't realize that talking is not the same as listening.
All right. Well, Very interesting conversation. Honestly, like I probably could go another hour because there are other questions I had, and there's a lot of different directions I could take this conversation. But I really appreciate you taking the time, and like I said, very very interesting. I'm gonna go pick up the book and make sure I add that to my reading list. So thank you.
Absolutely. And if you don't want to read it, you can listen to it. That's also an option.
I mean, I do that a lot. I told you I've got like a backlog of like 160 books. That is spread across, physical books, audio books, and Kindle books. I've got all of the above.
There you go. So I say take a walk in the with hopefully nice weather wherever you are, whenever you're listening to this, and have a listen. And please let me know what you think. And if you're doing something interesting and engaging in your community, or have something hopeful to share, that's let me know, because the best thing we can do is to inspire one another with our examples of good things we can do in the world. Otherwise, we just remain passive spectators. We just remain hand-wringing chicken littles, decrying that the sky is falling, instead of active participants in our own lives and communities, using the tools to do good in the world. And that's my hope.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Take care.